The evening came quietly over Jerusalem as the day of preparation drew to its close. The city remained active for a time, filled with people who had arrived for the feast. But as the light lowered, movement slowed. Lamps were lit inside houses. Courtyards settled into stillness. The stone streets, worn smooth by many years of use, held the warmth of the day and then gradually released it into the night. The city did not yet sleep, but it began to rest. Jesus was aware that the hour was near. He had spoken openly in the city during the day, teaching in the temple courts, answering questions, and addressing the people. Now evening had come, and he turned his attention to what remained to be done. He sent his disciples ahead with clear instructions, telling them where to prepare the Passover. They went into the city and found things as he had told them. A large upper room was made ready, furnished and prepared. Everything was arranged according to custom. When the time came, Jesus reclined at the table with the 12. They gathered in the upper room as they had done many times before in different places. But this night was marked by a quiet weight that rested over the meal. The food was set before them. The bread was broken. The cups were shared. The room was lit by lamplight, casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, the city continued its muted evening sounds, distant and steady. As they ate, Jesus spoke to them plainly. He acknowledged what was about to happen. He spoke a betrayal, not an accusation, but as a fact that would soon unfold. The disciples listened, uncertain, each aware of his own place at the table. The meal continued according to the order of the feast. Words were spoken. Silence followed. Nothing was rushed. During the meal, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them. He took the cup, gave thanks, and shared it among them. His actions followed the familiar pattern, yet his words carried a seriousness that was not missed. The disciples remained with him, listening, eating, drinking, trying to understand what lay ahead without fully grasping it. After the meal, they sang a hymn together. The sound of their voices was contained within the room, steady and unadorned. When it was finished, they rose and left the house. They went out of the city, crossing through the streets and toward the Mount of Olives. The night air was cool. The city gates stood behind them. The road was familiar, walked many times before. As they walked, Jesus spoke again. He told them that they would all fall away, that what was written would be fulfilled. Peter spoke in response, asserting his loyalty. Jesus answered him directly, telling him what would happen before the rooster crowed. The exchange was clear and unembellished. The words were spoken calmly. The group continued on. They came to a place called Gethsemane, a garden at the foot of the mount. The olive trees stood quietly, their branches still. The ground beneath them was firm, marked by long use. Jesus told his disciples to sit there while he went a little farther to pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him. The others remained behind, waiting. As he went on a short distance, the weight of the night pressed more fully upon him. He became deeply distressed and troubled. He spoke openly to those with him, telling them that his soul was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He asked them to remain and keep watch. Then he went a little farther, fell to the ground, and prayed. His prayer was direct. He spoke to the Father, acknowledging the hour and asking that, if it were possible, the cup might pass from him. He did not hide his distress. He did not disguise his desire. Yet he concluded by submitting himself to the will of the Father, placing the outcome beyond his own choosing. The words were spoken plainly, without ceremony. When he returned to the disciples, he found them sleeping. He spoke to them and then went away again to pray. This happened more than once. Each time, the night remained unchanged. The garden stayed quiet. The olive trees stood still. The disciples struggled to remain awake. Jesus returned to prayer, speaking again the same words, remaining in the same place, submitting himself fully. The night continued. Time passed without announcement. The city beyond the garden remained unaware of what was unfolding among the trees. Eventually, Jesus returned to the disciples and told them that the hour had come. Even as he spoke, movement appeared at the edge of the garden. Lanterns approached. Footsteps were heard. A group arrived, led by Judas. Judas stepped forward and identified Jesus with a kiss, as arranged. The act was simple and immediate. Those who had come with him moved in and took hold of Jesus. One of those with Jesus reacted, drawing a sword and striking the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus spoke, telling him to put the sword away. He addressed those who had come, noting that they had come out as against a robber, though he had been with them openly in the temple day after day. The disciples then fled. They left the garden and scattered into the night. Jesus was taken by those who had arrested him and led away. The garden remained behind, quiet again, the olive trees unchanged, the place returning to stillness after the brief disturbance. The night before, the crucifixion continued, moving forward into what would come next, without pause, without reversal. The events had begun. The path was set, and the city of Jerusalem remained standing under the same night sky, unaware that the hours ahead would alter everything that followed. Jesus was led from the garden into the city, while the night remained steady and unchanged. The path from Gethsemane was familiar, rising gently toward the walls of Jerusalem. Those who held him walked with purpose, carrying lanterns that cast narrow light onto stone and earth. The sound of footsteps echoed briefly and then faded. The air was cool. The city gate stood open, receiving them without resistance. Nothing in the streets announced what was taking place. He was brought first to the house of the high priest. The building stood firm and enclosed, its courtyard already lit with fire against the chill of the night. Servants and officers moved quietly within it, preparing for what they knew was coming. Jesus was led inside and stood before those who had gathered. The assembly formed without haste. Witnesses were brought forward. Questions were asked. Statements were made. The process unfolded according to established custom. Those who spoke against him did not agree with one another. Their words did not align. The testimony remained divided. Jesus stood and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He remained silent through much of what was said, allowing the accusations to pass without response. The room remained tense but controlled, governed by procedure rather than noise. At last, the high priest addressed him directly and asked whether he was the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed. Jesus answered plainly. He did not raise his voice. He did not qualify his words. His response was clear and direct. Those present reacted immediately. The high priest tore his garments. The decision followed quickly. They declared him deserving of death. From that moment, the treatment changed. Some began to spit on him. Others blindfolded him and struck him. They mocked him and demanded answers. The actions were deliberate. They followed one after another. Jesus did not respond. He remained where he was, receiving what was done to him without resistance. Outside, in the courtyard, Peter sat among the servants, warming himself by the fire. The night air pressed close. People moved around him casually. A servant girl noticed him and spoke, saying that he had been with Jesus. Peter denied it. He spoke simply, dismissing the claim. He moved away toward the entrance. Another noticed him there and spoke again. Peter denied it once more. The fire crackled. Time passed. Later, others standing nearby insisted that he was one of them. Noting his accent, Peter began to call down curses and swear that he did not know the man they were speaking about. Immediately, the rooster crowed. Peter remembered the words that had been spoken to him earlier that night. He left the courtyard and wept. The night continued around him, unchanged by his grief. The fire burned. Voices carried on. The city remained unaware of what had just taken place within its walls. Inside, Jesus remained under guard. The hours passed slowly. No one slept deeply. The proceedings waited for morning, when authority could move forward. The night held everything in suspension, neither advancing nor retreating, carrying each moment quietly toward what was coming next. The night continued to stretch forward without interruption, holding its shape as Jesus remained in custody within the house of the high priest. The hours before dawn moved slowly, marked not by change, but by waiting. Lamps burned low. Shadows shifted along the walls as those present adjusted their positions. Guards remained nearby, alert but unhurried, following instructions that had already been given. Jesus stood or sat where he was placed, watched but not engaged, present within the stillness of the night. Inside the house, conversation rose and fell in muted tones. Decisions had already been made, yet nothing could proceed fully until morning. The law required daylight, authority required form, and so the night held everything in restraint. Jesus was kept under guard while time passed in its ordinary way, one moment following another without announcement. He was not offered rest. He was not given comfort, yet there was no struggle. No attempt was made to escape. His posture remained calm, his presence steady. The events of the garden, the arrest, the questioning, and the mistreatment had already taken place, and now there was only waiting. The stillness carried weight, not because of action, but because of what had already been set in motion. Outside the house, the city of Jerusalem remained largely quiet. Most homes were dark. Those who slept did so unaware of what was unfolding. The stone streets lay empty, reflecting the faint light of the moon and the occasional lamp. The city walls stood firm, unchanged, having seen many nights pass beneath the same sky. This night did not appear different from any other. As the hours passed, the guards remained in place. Some spoke briefly to one another. Others watched in silence. Jesus remained within their sight. He did not speak again. He did not respond to what had already been done. The silence around him was not forced. It settled naturally, as though nothing further needed to be said. The first signs of morning approached gradually. The darkness did not lift all at once. It thinned slowly, barely noticeable at first. The air remained cool. The lamps continued to burn. The night had not yet released what it held, but the approach of dawn was inevitable. When morning came, the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes gathered together. The assembly formed according to custom. Jesus was brought before them again. The question was asked once more, formally this time, in the light of day. He answered as he had before, plainly and without hesitation. The response did not change. The conclusion remained the same. They led him away to deliver him to the Roman authority. The decision had moved beyond the night and into the day. The path forward was clear. What had begun quietly in the garden now continued openly, carried from one authority to another. The night before the crucifixion had reached its end. It had held prayer, arrest, denial, silence, accusation, and waiting. It released all of it into the coming morning without resistance. Jerusalem remained standing beneath a rising light, unaware of the weight that the new day would carry, and the path continued forward, steady and unbroken, into what was already prepared. When morning came fully, the light rose gradually over Jerusalem, touching the stone walls and narrow streets without haste. The city began to stir in its ordinary way. Doors opened slowly. People moved through familiar paths. The sound of footsteps and quiet voices returned as the night released its hold. Nothing in the city's movement suggested that this morning was different from any other. Life resumed according to its usual rhythm. Jesus was led away from the place where he had been held through the night. Those who brought him moved with purpose, guiding him through the streets toward the Roman authority. He did not resist. He did not speak as he walked. His steps followed the path set before him, steady and unbroken. The distance was not long, yet each moment passed with weight, carried forward without interruption. He was brought before the Roman governor. The place of judgment stood firm and orderly, governed by procedure and authority. Jesus was placed before him, and the accusations were presented. The governor questioned him directly. The exchange was measured. When Jesus spoke, his words were clear and simple. At other moments, he remained silent. The governor observed him closely, listening not only to the words spoken, but also to the silence that followed. Those who had brought Jesus continued to press their accusations. Their words were repeated. Their insistence did not fade. The governor found no clear cause for condemnation in what he heard. The process moved forward slowly, shaped by custom and expectation rather than haste. The morning air remained cool. The light continued to rise. It was customary during the feast for one prisoner to be released. The governor presented this custom to the crowd that had gathered. The choice was placed before them plainly. One was Jesus, known to many for his teaching. The other was a man imprisoned for insurrection and violence. The names were spoken. The decision was requested openly. The crowd responded together. Their voices rose in unison, calling for the release of the other man. The sound carried across the open space, firm and repeated. The governor asked again about Jesus, asking what should be done with him. The answer came quickly. The call was clear and unwavering. The decision did not soften with repetition. Seeing that resistance would not change the outcome, the governor took water and washed his hands before the crowd. The action was deliberate and visible. He declared himself innocent of what would follow. The words were spoken aloud. Responsibility was placed elsewhere. The moment was marked clearly. Jesus was then handed over to be crucified. The transfer of authority was complete. The matter moved forward without delay. The soldiers took him and led him away from the place of judgment into the governor's headquarters. The space changed, but the process continued. Inside, the soldiers gathered around him. They placed a robe on him. A crown of thorns was woven and set upon his head. They struck him and mocked him, bowing in gesture without reverence. The actions followed one another in clear sequence. There was no confusion. There was no hesitation. Jesus remained silent through it all, standing where he was placed, receiving what was done to him without resistance. When they had finished, they removed the robe and put his own clothes back on him. The moment passed without commentary. The next step followed immediately. They led him out to be crucified. Jesus carried the cross as they moved through the city. The weight pressed upon him. His pace slowed. The road was uneven, worn by years of passage. The movement continued steadily. Along the way, a man coming in from the countryside was compelled to carry the cross for him. The exchange was brief and unremarkable. The procession did not stop. The crowd followed at a distance. Some watched silently. Others spoke among themselves. The city absorbed the movement as it had absorbed many others before. Streets opened and closed behind them. The light of morning remained steady. They came to the place called Golgotha. The ground there was open and firm. The place was known. Preparations were made according to custom. Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. The offer passed without pause. The work proceeded. The morning continued to unfold, carrying everything forward according to what had already been decided. The city remained under the same rising light. The path that had begun in the night now stood fully within the day, steady and unbroken, moving forward without interruption toward what was yet to come. The same morning continued without interruption, holding its shape as the procession moved beyond the place of judgment and settled into the slow passage through the city. The light had fully risen now, spreading evenly across the stone streets and walls, revealing details that the night had kept hidden. The city functioned as it always did at this hour. People crossed paths. Merchants prepared their spaces. Voices carried briefly and then faded. Nothing in the movement of the city announced what was being carried through it. Jesus moved forward with the soldiers, step following step, the path clearly marked by long use. The weight he carried affected his pace, not stopping it, but shaping it. Each movement was deliberate. There was no sudden change in direction, no hesitation that altered the course. The procession maintained a steady rhythm, guided by routine rather than emotion. Those leading did so with practiced familiarity, accustomed to the route and to the task. The man compelled to carry the cross took his place without protest. The transfer was brief and the burden shifted from one set of shoulders to another, and the movement continued. There was no pause to mark the moment. The exchange blended into the larger motion, becoming part of the same unbroken sequence. The road accepted the steps placed upon it, as it had accepted countless others before. Around them, the city remained attentive, only in fragments. Some turned their heads as the group passed. Others continued their work. Windows opened and closed. Doorways framed brief glances that ended as quickly as they began. The sound of footsteps echoed briefly against stone and then dissolved. The air carried no announcement, no signal that would separate this movement from any other. As they walked, the distance to the place of execution closed gradually. The terrain shifted subtly, rising and leveling, shaped by years of passage. The ground was firm beneath their feet. Dust lifted lightly and settled again. The light remained consistent, revealing no change in the sky. The morning advanced in its ordinary way, indifferent to what was unfolding beneath it. Jesus did not speak as they moved. His presence remained quiet, contained, steady. He did not resist the direction set before him, the events of the night, the questioning, the silence, the decisions made by others, all remained behind him now, carried forward into the present moment without interruption. The path allowed no return, only continuation. Those following at a distance kept their place. Some stayed near. Others remained farther back. Their movement was cautious, uncoordinated, shaped by curiosity rather than purpose. The crowd did not surge or scatter. It flowed loosely around the procession, parting and closing again as the group advanced. When they approached Golgotha, the surroundings grew more open. The place was known. It stood outside the central life of the city, set apart by its purpose. The ground there bore the marks of use, shaped by events that had passed before. The approach did not surprise those who led the way. It followed the same route taken many times. Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh. The offer was made briefly and plainly. He did not take it. The moment passed without comment. The preparation continued according to what had already been determined. Each step followed the one before it without deviation. The morning remained steady. The light did not shift. The city continued behind them, carrying on with its ordinary movement, unaware of how close it stood to what would follow. The path that had begun in quiet prayer and arrest now moved openly under the sun, unchanged in direction, uninterrupted in purpose. The moment held itself there, between movement and what was yet to come, sustained by routine, by authority, by the steady unfolding of time. Nothing hurried, nothing reversed. The sequence continued forward, calm and deliberate. As the morning advanced and the city remained standing beneath it, the morning remained steady as the procession reached the place set apart outside the city. Golgotha lay open beneath the same light that had risen over Jerusalem, its ground firm and uneven, shaped by repeated use. The city stood behind them, its walls and rooftops now distant, continuing in its ordinary movement. Here, the space was quieter, removed from daily paths, known for what took place there rather than for who passed through. Jesus was brought to the place without resistance. The soldiers moved with practiced familiarity, carrying out their work according to custom. The preparation began in an ordered manner. The surroundings did not respond. The ground remained still. The air carried no signal of change. Everything unfolded as it had many times before. They took him and prepared the cross. The wood was set in place. The work proceeded without haste and without interruption. Jesus was positioned upon it. The actions followed one another deliberately. There was no confusion. There was no discussion. The moment advanced according to what had already been decided earlier in the day. As they carried out the task, Jesus remained silent. He did not resist the hands that moved him. He did not speak to those who stood nearby. His posture remained steady, contained within the sequence of events unfolding around him. The sound of movement and effort rose briefly and then settled again. The soldiers cast lots for his garments, dividing them among themselves. The clothing was taken and assigned according to chance. The act was ordinary, carried out without ceremony. The garments were claimed. The matter was settled. The work continued. Jesus was lifted up between two others, one on each side. The crosses stood in place, marking the scene clearly. The position was visible from a distance. The arrangement followed custom. Nothing about it was unexpected to those who carried it out. An inscription was placed above him, written plainly, stating the charge. It was set where it could be seen. The words were simple and direct. The sign remained there, fixed and visible. Those who passed by spoke as they moved along. Some mocked. Others shook their heads. The words were spoken openly. The sound carried briefly and then faded. The leaders stood nearby, observing. Soldiers remained at their post, watching and waiting. The scene held its shape without change. Jesus spoke briefly, addressing those around him. His words were few and clear. He did not raise his voice. He did not prolong what he said. The moment passed and settled again into stillness. The morning continued to move forward. The light remained steady. The sky did not change. The city behind them carried on with its life, unaware of the weight held in this open place beyond its walls. The scene remained as it was, fixed and unbroken, holding the moment without movement toward resolution. As time continued to unfold calmly around it, the scene remained fixed beneath the open sky, unchanged in its arrangement as the morning continued its slow passage. The crosses stood firmly in the ground, their bases settled into the earth that had received them many times before. The place did not react to what was held within it. Stone, dust, and air remained as they were, steady and unmoved. The light rested evenly across the scene, revealing wood, rope, and flesh without emphasis or drama. Jesus remained on the cross, where he had been placed, his body held in the same position, supported by the wood beneath him. His posture did not change suddenly. The movement of breath followed its own restrained rhythm, shallow and deliberate. There was effort in each breath, but the account did not dwell on sensation. It remained with what could be observed from the outside. His presence was contained within the stillness that surrounded him. The two men crucified with him remained on either side, their forms visible but secondary within the space. They did not draw attention away from the central figure. Their presence marked the place, but did not alter the rhythm of the moment. The crosses stood in a line, evenly spaced, forming a fixed arrangement that did not shift as time passed. The soldiers remained nearby, fulfilling their duty by waiting. They were accustomed to such scenes. Some stood, leaning slightly on their weapons. Others sat on the ground, resting where they could. Their voices rose briefly in conversation and then lowered again. The sound did not carry far. It blended into the open air and dissolved. The work assigned to them had already been completed. What remained was watchfulness. The garments that had been taken lay where they had been placed after being divided. Nothing further was done with them. They did not move unless stirred lightly by the air. The act of dividing them had ended. The objects remained as quiet witnesses to what had already taken place. Those who passed by continued along the nearby path. Some slowed as they approached, their attention drawn momentarily to the scene. Others walked on without stopping. Words were spoken, some in passing, some with intent, but none lingered. Each voice entered the space briefly and then left it again. The open place absorbed the sound without response. The leaders stood at a distance, observing. Their posture remained controlled. They did not approach. They did not withdraw. Their presence remained fixed, as though anchored to the edge of the scene. They watched without intervening, without altering what had been set in motion earlier in the day. Above Jesus, the inscription remained fastened in place. The letters were clear and readable. The words did not change. They remained visible to anyone who approached from any direction. The sign did not move. It did not require attention. It simply remained part of the structure of the moment. Jesus spoke again, briefly. His words were few and measured. They were not repeated. He did not raise his voice. The sound carried only as far as needed and then faded. Afterward, the stillness returned naturally, without effort. No response followed. The scene resumed its quiet posture. Time continued to move forward, marked not by events, but by subtle changes in light and shadow. The sun advanced slowly in the sky. Shadows shifted along the ground and across the wood of the crosses. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible, noticeable only by comparison with what had come before. The air remained steady. The sky remained clear. Those closest to the cross remained where they were. They did not leave. They did not move closer. They waited as they had been instructed. The waiting did not have a defined endpoint. It stretched forward into the middle of the day, carried by expectation rather than action. The place held everything in suspension. Nothing advanced toward conclusion. Nothing retreated from what had been established. The cross remained upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. The moment stayed exactly where it was, allowing time to pass through it quietly, without interruption, without resolution, as the day continued to unfold under the same unchanging sky. The day continued to hold its steady form as the hours moved forward, remaining calm and unbroken around the place where the crosses stood. The sun climbed gradually higher, and the light settled more fully across the open ground. Nothing in the sky announced a change. The air remained clear. The city beyond the walls continued its ordinary movement, distant and disconnected from what was unfolding here. The place of execution remained set apart. Holding its stillness without interruption, Jesus remained on the cross, his body held in the same position, sustained by the wood beneath him. Time passed through the moment slowly. The rhythm of breath continued, restrained and measured. His posture did not shift suddenly. The stillness around him was not empty. It was filled with waiting, the kind that stretches without clear markers, carried forward by the passage of the day rather than by action. Those who stood nearby remained in place. The soldiers kept watch, their attention steady, their movements minimal. They adjusted their stance when needed, shifting weight from one foot to another, resting when they could. Conversation rose briefly and then fell again. Nothing they did altered the structure of the scene. The work assigned to them had been completed earlier. Now there was only time. Some women stood at a distance, watching. They did not approach. They remained where they could see without being seen closely. Their presence was quiet and consistent. They stayed through the passing hours, holding their place as the light changed slowly around them. They did not speak loudly. They did not move away. Jesus spoke again, his words few and direct. He addressed those near him without raising his voice. The sound carried briefly through the open space and then faded. The account remained with the words as they were spoken, without explanation or expansion. Afterward, the stillness returned, settling naturally around the scene. The hours advanced toward midday. The sun reached higher, and the light became more direct. Shadows shortened and shifted. The ground beneath the crosses remained firm and unchanged. The sky continued its course without interruption. The scene did not move toward conclusion. It remained within the same posture it had held since the morning. The city behind the walls carried on. People moved through streets. Markets opened. Work continued. The sounds of daily life rose faintly and then softened again with distance. None of it altered what stood here. The separation between the city and this place remained complete. Those present continued to wait. The waiting was not marked by urgency or activity. It was shaped by endurance, by remaining where one was placed, by allowing time to pass. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was resolved. The moment remained suspended, held between what had already happened and what was yet to come, steady and contained as the day continued to unfold quietly around the crosses. The same hours continued to pass without interruption, stretching outward as the sun settled into its place high above the open ground. The light remained clear and steady, resting evenly across the crosses and the earth beneath them. Nothing in the sky suggested movement beyond the slow advance of time itself. The place remained exposed and quiet, held apart from the city, unchanged in its purpose and shape. Jesus remained where he was, his body supported by the wood, his posture unaltered. The effort of breathing continued, steady and restrained, following a rhythm shaped by endurance rather than movement. No sudden change marked the passing of minutes. Each moment followed the one before it in the same way, without emphasis or pause. The stillness did not lessen, it deepened only through duration. The soldiers continued their watch. Their presence was practical and contained. They remained near, alert but untroubled, accustomed to waiting. From time to time, one shifted position, another adjusted his stance. The sounds of such movement were brief, and then gone. Their attention returned to the quiet task of remaining until the moment was complete. Those who watched from a distance did not leave. The women remained where they were, maintaining their place without drawing attention. Their posture did not change. They stood through the passing of the hours, bearing witness simply by remaining present. They did not speak. They did not approach. The space between them and the crosses remained unchanged. The inscription above Jesus stayed fixed in place. The words did not fade. They did not draw a further response. They remained visible, part of the structure of the moment, neither emphasized nor ignored. The sign stayed where it had been placed, unmoving as the light shifted around it. Time continued forward, marked only by the gradual change of shadow and light across the ground. The sun held its position. The air remained steady. There was no sudden sound, no movement that altered the balance of the scene. The day advanced without announcement. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His words were brief, directed toward those who stood near. The sound carried just far enough to be heard, and then settled again into silence. No response followed. The words did not change what surrounded them. They became part of what had already been spoken and then passed. The city beyond the walls continued its routine. Faint sounds carried across the distance and softened again. Life moved forward elsewhere, separated by walls and space from what remained fixed here. The contrast did not shift. The distance remained complete. The moment did not move toward conclusion yet. It held itself in suspension, shaped by waiting rather than action. The crosses remained upright. The ground remained firm. The sky remained unchanged. The hours continued to pass, calm and unbroken, as the day rested fully around the place where everything had been set and left to remain. As the day continued to unfold, the stillness around the crosses remained intact, settling deeper into the open space beyond the city walls. The sun had moved beyond its highest point, though the change was gradual and almost unnoticeable unless one remained long enough to observe it. Light rested differently on the ground now, stretching shadows outward, reshaping them slowly without altering the scene itself. The air stayed clear. Nothing disturbed the quiet that had taken hold of the place. Jesus remained on the cross, his body supported by the wood where it had been fixed. His posture did not change. There was no sudden movement, no visible attempt to shift weight or seek relief. The effort of breathing continued in a restrained rhythm, each breath following the one before it with measured endurance. The account remained with what could be seen from a distance, with what remained outwardly unchanged despite the passing of time. The wood of the cross stood firm, unchanged by the hours it held. The grain of the timber was visible in the steady light, marked by use and exposure. The ground beneath remained packed and unmoved, bearing the weight placed upon it earlier in the day. Nothing in the place reacted to what it held. The earth received everything without response. The soldiers continued their watch, remaining close enough to observe, far enough to wait. Their presence was quiet and functional. They were accustomed to such scenes, and did not hurry what could not be hurried. Occasionally, one shifted his stance, adjusting to the heat or the long stillness. Another rested where he could. These movements were brief and unremarkable, returning quickly to silence. The women who stood at a distance remained where they were. They did not draw nearer. They did not turn away. Their position did not change as the light shifted around them. They remained through the passing hours, holding their place without motion, bound to the moment by attention rather than action. The space between them and the crosses stayed unchanged, neither closing nor widening. Jesus spoke again, quietly, his voice controlled and measured. His words were few, spoken without urgency or repetition. They carried just far enough to be heard by those nearby and then dissolved into the open air. No reply followed. The sound did not linger. The stillness returned naturally, as though it had only been briefly disturbed and then restored. Time continued its slow advance. The sun moved onward in its course. Shadows lengthened across the ground and along the wood of the crosses, shifting almost imperceptibly from one moment to the next. The change was gradual, requiring patience to notice. The sky remained clear. The air remained steady. Nothing in the environment marked the passage of hours beyond these subtle signs. Beyond the walls, the city continued its ordinary life. Sounds carried faintly across the distance and then softened again. People moved through streets, Work continued. None of it reached fully into this place. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete, as though the two existed in parallel without touching. The moment did not move toward resolution. It held itself in the same posture it had assumed earlier, sustained by waiting rather than action. The crosses remained upright, the ground remained firm, the air remained still. The day continued quietly, allowing time to pass through the scene without interruption, without change, as everything remained exactly where it had been set. The afternoon continued to unfold with the same restrained pace, as though time itself had slowed to match the stillness of the place. The sun moved gradually westward, though the change was marked only by the lengthening of shadows and the soft shift of light across the ground. Nothing announced the passing hours. The open space beyond the city walls remained quiet, held in a calm that did not invite interruption. Jesus remained on the cross, his body still supported by the wood, unchanged in position. The effort of breath continued, measured and deliberate, each breath following the one before it, without urgency. There was no sudden movement to mark the passage of time. The endurance of the moment was expressed only through its persistence, through remaining where he had been placed. The air around the crosses remained steady. There was no wind strong enough to alter the scene. Dust lay settled on the ground, disturbed only briefly when someone shifted position nearby. The light rested differently now, touching the wood and the earth at a lower angle, revealing textures that had been less visible earlier in the day. Even so, the scene itself remained unchanged. The soldiers continued to wait, their duty defined not by action, but by presence. They remained near, alert without agitation, familiar with the long hours such moments required. From time to time, one adjusted his posture, another rested against the ground. These movements were brief and practical, returning quickly to stillness. Conversation, if it rose at all, did not last. Silence resumed its place. Those watching from a distance remained where they were. The women did not move closer, nor did they turn away. Their attention remained fixed, carried forward by resolve rather than motion. They stood through the passing hours, bearing witness simply by remaining present. The distance between them and the crosses did not change. The space held them where they were. The inscription above Jesus remained visible, unchanged by the passing light. The words stood as they had been written, plain and unembellished. The sign did not draw further attention. It remained part of the structure of the moment, fixed and unmoving as the day advanced around it. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His words were few, measured, and complete. They were spoken once and not repeated. The sound carried briefly and then settled back into the open air. No response followed. The silence returned without effort, restoring the balance of the scene. The afternoon continued to deepen. The sun lowered gradually, and the shadows stretched farther across the ground. The change was slow, almost imperceptible unless one remained long enough to observe it. The sky remained clear, the air remained steady. Nothing intervened to alter the course of the moment. The city beyond the walls continued its life, distant and detached. Sounds carried faintly across the space and softened again. People moved through streets, unaware of the endurance unfolding here. The separation between the city and this place remained firm, as though held by an invisible boundary. The moment did not yet move toward conclusion. It remained suspended, shaped by waiting rather than action. The crosses stood upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass through the scene quietly, without interruption, without resolution. As the afternoon settled fully into place, the afternoon continued its slow descent, holding the same restrained calm over the open ground. The sun lowered by degrees so small they could not be measured without patience, and the light softened as it shifted, spreading longer shadows that reached farther across the earth. The place beyond the city walls remained quiet, separated from the movement of daily life, receiving the hours without resistance. Nothing in the air announced what time it was becoming. The change revealed itself only through duration. Jesus remained on the cross, held in the same position as before. His body did not move beyond what was required to remain there. The rhythm of breath continued, steady and controlled, shaped by endurance rather than effort. Each breath followed the one before it in the same manner, without urgency, without interruption. The account remained with the outward stillness of the moment, with what could be seen and heard from a distance, not with what could only be imagined. The wood of the cross bore the weight placed upon it, unchanged by the hours it held. Its surface caught the light differently now, revealing grain and marks that had not been visible earlier. The ground beneath remained packed and unmoving. Dust lay settled, disturbed only when someone nearby adjusted position. The earth received everything without response, holding the scene as it had been set. The soldiers continued to wait. Their duty did not require movement, only presence. They remained near enough to observe, far enough to remain detached. From time to time, one shifted his stance, adjusting to the lengthening hours. Another rested where he could. These movements were brief and practical, never drawing attention. Silence returned immediately after each small adjustment. The women who watched from a distance remained where they were. Their posture did not change. They did not speak. They did not approach. They remained through the passing of time, fixed in their attention, held in place by the moment itself. The distance between them and the crosses remained the same, neither closing nor widening, sustained without effort. The inscription above Jesus remained fastened in place. The words stood clearly, unchanged by the shifting light. They neither demanded attention nor faded into the background. They remained part of the structure of the scene. One more element set and left to stand. Jesus spoke again, quietly, his voice low and measured. His words were few, spoken once, without repetition. The sound traveled only as far as it needed to be heard and then dissolved into the open air. No reply followed. The stillness returned naturally, settling again over the place. The sky remained clear as the afternoon advanced. The sun continued its course, lowering slowly toward the horizon. Shadows stretched farther, altering their shape without changing the form of what cast them. The air remained steady. No wind rose to disturb the balance of the scene. Beyond the walls, the city continued its life. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again. People moved through streets, unaware of how the hours were being held here. The separation between the city and this place remained complete, as though marked by more than distance alone. The moment did not move toward resolution. It remained suspended within the same posture it had held since the morning. The crosses stood upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass through the scene slowly and quietly, without interruption, without conclusion. As the afternoon deepened and the light continued to soften, the afternoon continued its slow descent, stretching outward across the open ground as though the hours themselves had grown heavier and more deliberate. The sun lowered gradually, its movement so subtle that it could only be perceived by those who remained long enough to notice the change. Lights soft as it traveled across the scene, no longer sharp, no longer pressing, resting gently upon wood, stone, and earth. The place beyond the city walls remained quiet, unchanged in its purpose, holding everything within it without response. Jesus remained on the cross, his body supported exactly where it had been set earlier in the day. There was no visible shift in his position, no movement beyond what was required to remain there. The rhythm of breath continued, restrained and measured, each breath following the one before it with effort that did not announce itself. The account remained with what could be seen from a distance, with the stillness that marked the moment, allowing time to pass without interruption. The crosses stood firm against the sky, their outlines unchanged as the light moved around them. The wood absorbed the softer light, revealing texture and grain that had been less visible earlier. Shadows gathered along their edges and stretched across the ground below, lengthening slowly, almost the earth beneath remained packed and unmoving, bearing the marks of what had already occurred without shifting further. The soldiers continued to wait, their presence shaped by routine rather than intention. They remained near enough to observe, far enough to remain detached. The long hours did not hurry them. From time to time, one adjusted his stance, another shifted where he sat, responding quietly to the passing time. These movements were brief and practical, leaving no lasting change. Silence returned immediately, settling again over the place. The women who watched from a distance remained where they were. Their posture did not change as the light softened and the air cooled. They did not approach, nor did they turn away. Their presence endured through the hours, marked not by movement, but by remaining. The space between them and the crosses stayed constant, neither closing nor widening, held steady by the stillness of the moment. The inscription above Jesus remained fixed in place, its words unchanged as the day advanced. The letters stood clear against the background, neither fading nor drawing new attention. The sign did not shift. It did not invite response. It remained part of the structure of the scene, set and left as it was. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and controlled, carrying only as far as it needed to be heard. The words were few, spoken once, without repetition. They did not alter the posture of those nearby. They entered the open air briefly and then faded, leaving the stillness intact. No reply followed. The moment returned to silence, without effort. The air around the crosses remained calm. There was no wind strong enough to disturb the balance of the scene. Dust lay settled on the ground, undisturbed except by the smallest movements nearby. The sky remained clear, its color deepening gradually as the afternoon continued its slow transition toward evening. Beyond the city walls, life continued without pause. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance, softened by space and air, never fully reaching this place. People moved through streets, unaware of how the hours were being held here. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete, sustained by more than distance alone. The moment did not move toward resolution. It remained suspended, held in the same posture it had assumed earlier, shaped by endurance rather than action. The crosses remained upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass through the scene quietly, without interruption, without conclusion. As the light continued to soften and the afternoon slowly gave way to what would come next. The afternoon continued its gradual movement, easing further toward its later hours without any clear boundary marking the change. The light softened again, becoming warmer and less direct as it settled across the open ground. Shadows stretched farther now, lengthening across the earth and touching the bases of the crosses, changing their shape without altering their presence. The place beyond the city walls remained quiet, set apart, holding everything within it with the same restrained stillness. Jesus remained on the cross, his body sustained where it had been placed, unchanged in position. Time passed through him without visible alteration. The rhythm of breath continued, measured and controlled, shaped by endurance rather than movement. There was no gesture that signaled the passing minutes. The account remained with the outward reality of the scene, with what could be observed as the hours continued to unfold. The crosses stood firm against the sky, their outlines steady as the light shifted around them. The wood absorbed the warmer tones of the afternoon, revealing subtle variations in texture and shadow. The ground beneath remained packed and unmoving, bearing the marks of earlier activity without responding further. Dust lay settled, undisturbed, resting in the same patterns formed earlier in the day. The soldiers continued their watch. Their presence remained quiet and functional, defined by waiting rather than action. They stayed near, maintaining their positions with minimal movement. Occasionally, one adjusted his stance or shifted where he stood, responding to the lengthening hours. These movements were brief and unremarkable, fading quickly back into stillness. Those watching from a distance remained in place. The women did not approach. They did not turn away. Their posture remained steady as the light softened and the air cooled slightly. Their presence was marked by constancy rather than motion, by remaining where they were as the day continued its slow descent. The space between them and the crosses remained unchanged. The inscription above Jesus remained visible, its words clear in the gentler light. The sign did not move. It did not draw further attention. It stood as it had been placed, part of the fixed arrangement of the scene, unaffected by the passing hours. Jesus spoke again, quietly, his voice low and measured. The words were few, spoken once, without repetition. They carried only as far as necessary and then dissolved into the open air. No response followed. The stillness returned immediately, settling again over the place without disturbance. The sky remained clear as the afternoon continued to deepen. The sun lowered gradually, though the change was felt more than seen. The air remained calm. No wind rose to shift the balance of the moment. Everything held its place. Beyond the walls, the city continued its life, distant and detached. Sounds drifted faintly across the space and softened again. Movement there did not reach fully into this place. The separation remained complete. The moment remained suspended, held between what had already taken place and what had not yet come. Nothing moved toward resolution. The crosses remained upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass quietly through the scene as the afternoon settled more fully into its later hours. The late afternoon continued to settle into the open ground with a calm that did not shift or break, as though the hours themselves had slowed to match the stillness held there. The sun moved lower by degrees too small to measure in any single moment. Its descent revealed only through the gradual softening of light and the steady lengthening of shadows across the earth. The place beyond the city walls remained unchanged in its quiet purpose, holding everything within it without reaction or response. Jesus remained on the cross, sustained in the same position where he had been placed earlier in the day. His body did not shift. There was no visible adjustment to mark the passage of time. The rhythm of breath continued, restrained and measured, each breath following the one before it with the same effort and persistence. The account remained with what could be seen from a distance, with the outward stillness that defined the moment, allowing time to pass without interruption. The crosses stood firm against the sky, their forms unchanged as the light moved around them. The wood absorbed the softer tones of the late afternoon, revealing grain, knots, and worn edges that had not been visible earlier. Shadows gathered along their sides and stretched across the ground beneath, changing shapes slowly, almost imperceptibly. The earth remained packed and unmoving, bearing the weight and the marks of what had already taken place without shifting further. The air remained calm. There was no wind strong enough to disturb the balance of the scene. Dust lay settled where it had fallen earlier, resting undisturbed unless someone nearby made the smallest movement. Even then, the disturbance was brief, and the dust returned quickly to stillness. The sky remained clear, its color deepening gradually as the sun continued its slow descent. The soldiers continued their watch, their presence quiet and contained. They remained near enough to observe, far enough to remain detached. The long hours did not hurry them. Waiting was familiar to them, and they accepted it without impatience. From time to time, One shifted his weight or adjusted his stance, responding to the cooling air or the strain of standing. Another rested briefly on the ground. These movements were practical and unremarkable, leaving no lasting trace on the scene. Silence returned immediately after each small adjustment. Those who watched from a distance remained where they were. The women did not approach. They did not withdraw. Their posture remained steady as the light softened and the warmth of the day slowly faded. They stood through the passing hours, marked not by motion, but by endurance, by remaining present without drawing attention. The space between them and the crosses remained constant, neither closing nor widening, held steady by the stillness of the place. The inscription above Jesus remained fixed in place, its words unchanged as the light shifted around them. The letters stayed clear and readable, neither fading nor demanding attention. The sign did not move. It did not invite response. It remained part of the structure of the moment, set where it had been placed and left there without alteration. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and controlled, carrying only as far as it needed to be heard. The words were few, spoken once, without repetition or emphasis. They entered the open air briefly and then faded, leaving the stillness intact. No reply followed. The silence returned naturally, as though it had only been briefly interrupted and then restored. Time continued its slow advance, marked only by subtle changes in light and shadow. The sun lowered further, and the warmth of the afternoon softened into a gentler presence. Shadows stretched farther across the ground, overlapping and shifting in shape without altering the scene itself. The air cooled slightly, though the change was gradual and unannounced. Nothing in the environment reacted to what was held there. Beyond the city walls, life continued without pause. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again before reaching this place. People moved through streets, engaged in tasks shaped by the rhythm of the day, unaware of how the hours were being held here. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete, sustained by distance, silence, and stillness. The moment did not move. Toward conclusion, it remained suspended, held in the same posture it had assumed earlier, shaped by endurance rather than action. The crosses remained upright, the ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass through the scene quietly, unbroken and unresolved. As the late afternoon deepened and the light continued its slow transition toward evening, the afternoon continued to give way to its later hours, not through any sudden change, but through a gradual softening that settled across the open ground. The light grew warmer and lower, touching the earth at a gentler angle, lengthening shadows until they stretched far beyond the bases of the crosses. The place remained quiet, held apart from the city, receiving the slow movement of time without resistance or response. Jesus remained on the cross, sustained in the same position, unchanged in posture. The passing of hours did not announce itself through movement. Breath continued in a restrained rhythm, steady and deliberate, shaped by endurance rather than urgency. Each moment followed the one before it without distinction. The account remained with what could be observed from a distance, with the stillness that defined the scene as time continued to pass. The crosses stood firm against the deepening sky. The wood absorbed the softer light of the late afternoon, revealing subtle variations in texture and shadow. The grain of the timber appeared more pronounced now, marked by use and exposure. The ground beneath remained packed and unmoving, holding the lengthening shadows without alteration. Dust lay settled, resting where it had fallen earlier in the day. The soldiers remained at their posts, waiting. Their presence was quiet and functional, shaped by routine rather than intention. They stayed near alert without agitation. Occasionally, one adjusted his stance or shifted his weight, responding to the cooling air and the long hours. These movements were brief and unremarkable, fading quickly back into stillness. Silence reclaimed the space after each small adjustment. Those who watched from a distance remained where they were. The women did not approach or withdraw. Their posture remained steady as the warmth of the day faded and the air cooled further. They remained through the passing hours, marked not by motion, but by constancy. The distance between them and the crosses did not change, held steady by the quiet persistence of the moment. The inscription above Jesus remained visible, unchanged as the light softened around it. The words stood clearly, neither emphasized nor obscured by the shifting shadows. The sign did not move. It did not invite attention. It remained part of the fixed arrangement of the scene, set in place and left to stand. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and controlled, his words few and measured. They carried briefly through the open air and then faded. No response followed. The stillness returned naturally, settling again over the place without effort or disturbance. The air remained calm. No wind rose to alter the balance of the scene. The sky stayed clear, its color deepening gradually as the sun continued its slow descent. The afternoon advanced toward evening without announcement, marked only by the softening light and the cooling air. Beyond the city walls, life continued in its ordinary rhythm. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again before reaching this place. Movement there remained detached, unaware of the endurance unfolding here. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete. The moment did not yet move. Toward conclusion, it remained suspended, held in the same posture it had maintained throughout the day. The crosses stood upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass quietly through the scene, unbroken and unresolved. As the late afternoon settled fully into its place beneath the lowering sun, the late afternoon continued its slow transition, settling deeper into the space as the light softened and thinned, losing the strength that it carried earlier in the day. The sun moved closer to the horizon, though its progress could only be sensed through the gradual change in color and the lengthening of shadows across the ground. The open place beyond the city walls remained still, unchanged in its form and purpose, holding the moment with quiet persistence. Jesus remained on the cross, sustained in the same position, his body unmoving except for the continued rhythm of breath. Each breath followed the one before it, with the same restrained effort, measured and deliberate. There was no visible gesture to mark the passing of time. The stillness of his posture remained constant, allowing the hours to move through the moment without interruption. The crosses stood unchanged against the darkening sky. The wood absorbed the fading light, its surface now marked by deeper shadows and softer edges. The grain and wear of the timber were more pronounced as the light lowered, revealing details that had gone unnoticed earlier. The ground beneath remained firm and settled, bearing the weight of the scene without alteration. Shadows stretched farther across the earth, overlapping and shifting slowly as the sun continued its descent. The air cooled gradually. The change was subtle, felt more than seen. Dust lay undisturbed on the ground, resting where it had settled earlier in the day. Nothing stirred it now. The calm of the place deepened, shaped by the absence of movement rather than by any active force. The soldiers remained where they were, their watch continuing without urgency. Their presence was defined by waiting. They had settled into the long hours, accepting them without impatience. From time to time, one adjusted his posture, another shifted where he stood or sat, responding quietly to the cooling air. These movements were brief and practical, leaving no lasting trace. Silence returned immediately, filling the space again. Those who watched from a distance remained in place. The women did not move closer, nor did they turn away. Their posture remained steady as the light dimmed, and the day drew toward its end. They stood through the passing hours, their presence marked by constancy rather than motion. The distance between them and the crosses remained unchanged, held steady by the stillness of the moment. The inscription above Jesus remained visible, though the fading light softened its contrast against the sky. The words did not change. The sign remained fixed in place, neither emphasized nor obscured. It continued to stand as it had been set, part of the structure of the scene, unmoving as the day waned. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and controlled, his words few and complete. They carried briefly through the open air and then faded. No response followed. The silence returned naturally, settling again over the place without resistance. The sky deepened in color as the sun lowered further. The light thinned, losing its warmth and clarity. Shadows stretched longer and grew darker, reshaping the ground without altering the form of what stood upon it. The air remained calm. No wind rose to disturb the balance of the scene. Beyond the city walls, life continued its course. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again before reaching this place. People moved through streets, unaware of how the hours were being held here. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete, sustained by distance and quiet. The moment did not move toward conclusion. It remained suspended, held in the same posture it had maintained throughout the day. The crosses remained upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass quietly through the scene, unbroken and unresolved, as the late afternoon gave way slowly to the approaching evening. The late afternoon continued its gradual passage toward evening, not through any sudden change, but through a slow deepening that settled over the open ground. The sun lowered further, its light thinning and warming at once, touching the earth at a gentler angle and allowing shadows to stretch long and unbroken across the place. The sky remained clear, holding its color steadily as the day eased toward its close. Nothing announced the transition. It revealed itself only through patience. Jesus remained on the cross, sustained in the same position where he had been placed earlier in the day. His posture did not shift. There was no visible attempt to alter what had already been said. The rhythm of breath continued, measured and restrained, shaped by endurance rather than urgency. Each breath followed the one before it without distinction, steady and contained. Time passed through the moment without marking itself upon his outward form. The crosses stood firm against the changing light, their silhouettes darkening as the sun moved lower. The wood absorbed the fading brightness, revealing deeper contrast between grain and shadow. Marks of war became more pronounced, lines and textures emerging as the light softened. The ground beneath remained packed and unmoving, receiving the lengthening shadows without response. Dust lay settled, undisturbed, resting in the same patterns formed earlier in the day. The air cooled slowly, almost the warmth of midday had eased, replaced by a gentler presence that carried no urgency. There was no wind to stir the ground or the garments that lay nearby. The calm of the place deepened, shaped by the absence of movement rather than by any deliberate stilling. The soldiers remained where they were, continuing their watch. Their presence was quiet and functional, defined by remaining rather than by doing. They had settled into the long hours, accepting the slow passage of time without impatience. From time to time, one adjusted his position or shifted his weight, responding to the cooling air or the length of standing. These movements were brief and practical, leaving no trace. Silence returned immediately after each small change. Those who watched from a distance remained in place. The women did not move closer, nor did they turn away. Their posture remained steady as the light continued to soften and the air cooled further. They stood through the passing hours, marked not by motion, but by constancy. The distance between them and the crosses remained unchanged, preserved by the quiet persistence of the moment. The inscription above Jesus remained fixed and visible, its words unchanged as the light thinned around them. The letters stood clear against the sky, neither emphasized nor obscured. The sign did not move. It did not invite attention. It remained part of the scene's structure, set where it had been placed and left there without alteration. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and controlled, his words few and complete. They traveled briefly through the open air and then faded. No response followed. The stillness returned naturally, settling again over the place without disturbance. The sun continued its descent, now noticeably closer to the horizon. The light lost more of its strength, becoming softer and more diffuse. Shadows stretched farther across the ground, overlapping and lengthening without altering the arrangement of what stood there. The sky deepened gradually in color, holding the day as it moved toward its close. Beyond the city walls, life continued without pause. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again before reaching this place. Movement there remained separate and unaware, carried forward by its own rhythm. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete. The moment did not yet move toward conclusion. It remained suspended, held in the same posture it had maintained throughout the day. The crosses remained upright. The ground remained firm. The air remained still. Time continued to pass quietly through the scene, unbroken and unresolved. As the late afternoon gave way steadily to the approaching evening, the evening continued its quiet approach, settling over the open ground with a gentleness that did not interrupt what had already been established. The sun moved lower still, its light thinning until it no longer pressed upon the scene, but rested lightly upon it. The warmth of the day faded gradually, replaced by a cooler presence that carried no urgency. The sky held its clarity, deepening in tone without drawing attention to itself. Everything remained in place, unchanged in posture, unchanged in order. Jesus remained on the cross, sustained in the same position as the hours moved past him. His body did not shift. There was no visible sign that marked the passing of time beyond the continued rhythm of breath. Each breath followed the one before it, with the same measured restraint, steady and contained. The endurance of the moment was expressed not through movement, but through remaining, through holding the same posture as the light continued to fade. The crosses stood darkening against the sky, their outlines becoming more pronounced as the contrast increased. The wood absorbed what remained of the light, revealing deeper shadows along its surface. Grain and marks left by use became more visible as brightness receded. The ground beneath remained firm and unchanged, bearing the lengthened shadows without response. Dust lay settled, undisturbed, resting exactly where it had been earlier in the day. The air cooled further, though the change was subtle and gradual. There was no wind to alter the scene, no movement to disturb the balance that had formed over the hours. The calm deepened, not by force, but by duration. The place beyond the city walls held everything it contained without reaction, as though time itself had slowed within its boundaries. The soldiers continued their watch, remaining where they were. Their presence was defined by waiting rather than by action. They had accepted the long hours and did not resist them. From time to time, one shifted his position slightly, responding to the cooling air or the length of standing. Another rested where he could. These movements were brief and practical, leaving no lasting change. Silence returned immediately, settling again over the place. Those who watched from a distance remained where they had stood throughout the day. The women did not approach, they did not withdraw. Their posture remained steady as the light faded and the air cooled. Their presence was marked by constancy, rather than motion, by remaining through the slow passage of time. The space between them and the crosses did not change, held steady by the stillness of the moment. The inscription above Jesus remained fixed, its words still visible, though softened by the fading light. The sign did not move. It did not draw new attention. It remained part of the structure of the scene, unchanged as the day moved toward its close. Jesus spoke again, quietly. His voice was low and measured, his words few and complete. They carried briefly through the cooling air and then faded. No response followed. The stillness returned without effort, settling again into the space that surrounded him. The sky deepened further in color as the sun continued its descent, now nearing the horizon. The remaining light grew softer, less defined, spreading evenly across the scene. Shadows stretched long and thin, reshaping the ground without altering the form of what stood upon it. The air remained calm. Nothing rose to disturb the balance that had been formed. Beyond the city walls, life continued as it had all day. Sounds drifted faintly across the distance and softened again before reaching this place. People moved through streets, unaware of how the hours were being held here. The separation between the city and the open ground remained complete, sustained by distance, silence, and time. The moment did not move toward resolution. It remained suspended, held in the same posture it had maintained through the long hours of the day. The crosses remained upright, the ground remained firm, the air remained still. Time continued to pass quietly through the scene, unbroken and unresolved, as the evening settled fully into place and the light continued to fade.